Hey everybody, it's hwsteele, and today is Thursday, September 26, 2024, and this is the September Gann Week video. Since this is the second video back in the series, the Gann Week series for this year, 2024, I'm looking at the second book that WD Gann wrote, his second proper book, so to speak, and that was, of course, Tunnel Thru The Air. Next month, in October, we'll look at his third book, Wall Street Stock Selector. But let's go ahead and get to Tunnel Thru The Air. What I wanted to do in this video, this particular Gann Week video, is point out the importance of studying this book with information that's outside of this book. Here's what I mean by that. If we look at chapter number 1, page number 1, we read about Robert Gordon being born. And this was Amelia Gordon, Robert's mother's third son. And then we read about she lost her oldest son, or her first son, in the San Francisco earthquake in April. Now, in the book, it just makes reference to the earthquake being in April. But if you aren't some sort of savant and know all kinds of trivia information, you would have to go study or look up outside of Tunnel Thru The Air to find out exactly when the San Francisco earthquake happened in April. And nowadays with the internet, that's very easy. Previously, you'd have to go to a library or something like that. But we find out that it happens on April 18th, 1906. And if we bring the calculator up here, we see that April 18th means there's 12 days left in April. May has 31, and then Robert Gordon was born on June 9th, so 9 added to that means 52 days. So there's 52 days, or about 1/7 of a year, between the San Francisco earthquake and Robert Gordon's birth. Now, we wouldn't know this unless we went outside of Tunnel Thru The Air to study that. In other words, something that Gann wrote and kind of gave us some general information about, and almost seemed a little bit flippant, or just kind of like, the San Francisco earthquake, incidentally. But when we study it, when we go outside of Tunnel Thru The Air to find out the precise date, we can compare it to another precise date we were just given, and we find out that it's an important number, because we know for a fact that Gann used the square of 52. It was one of his main calculators. Now, another example of this, just a few pages later in the book, in the second chapter on page 8, we have Robert Gordon's mother referencing the San Francisco earthquake again. And if we look here on page 7, we're able to actually get a general time frame of when this is happening. It says in 1914, when war broke out, and we're talking about the Great War, World War I, because this book was written in 1927, which obviously was before World War II. So they didn't refer to World War I as World War I. They called it the Great War. So we have this time frame given to us that when the war broke out in 1914, and then this is happening afterwards, where she's referencing the San Francisco earthquake again. So we have to go outside of Tunnel Thru The Air and look up World War I to see that it started at the end of July 1914. So if we look, we can see that this was after Robert Gordon's 8th birthday, because he turned 8 in 1914, obviously, since he was born in 1906, and he was born in June, and the war started at the end of July, so we know Robert was 8 years old on page 8 of this book. Now, we wouldn't really be able to verify that without having studied the stuff that's outside of Tunnel Thru The Air. And this might seem like it's really obvious to some people, but there's definitely some people out there who would think, I just need to really study this book. And the truth is, you need to take this book and reference things that seem flippant, like the San Francisco earthquake or the start of World War I, and get exact information for it. In fact, if we look, World War I started on July 28th. Robert Gordon was born on June 9th. So that leaves us 21 days left in June, plus 28 of July means World War I started 49 days, or the square of 7 days after Robert Gordon's birth. It also means that the San Francisco earthquake happened about 1/7 of a year before Robert was born, and 8 years later, about 1/7 of a year after Robert's birthday, we get the start of World War I. Now, if we move a little bit further here to page number 10 and 11, we see in 1917, when the United States entered the World War, young Robert was 11 years old. Now, again, if we just read that, we assume that Gann's being straightforward with us. But if we study this information and we find out when the United States entered the World War, we look this back up and we see that in April of 1917, the United States entered the war. So that means that this first sentence here in the second paragraph here on page 10 is not accurate. So Robert was still 10 years old when the United States entered the World War. But what's really interesting is, if you remember, that San Francisco earthquake happened in April of 1906, and almost exactly 11 years later, it's not quite, but almost, the United States entered the World War. So that happened on, I believe it was April 6th, and the actual earthquake happened on April 18th. But the point is, this 11 years is actually how long between the earthquake and the United States entering the World War, not the fact that Robert was 11 years old. So hopefully that makes sense. The point I'm trying to make here is that you definitely, unquestionably want to reference things that Gann's using, actual points in history, the real history of specifically the United States for the most part, since that's where the story takes place. But these things need to be looked at, like the World War, the San Francisco earthquake, all that kind of stuff. And you need to find out as much of the exact details, especially the exact dates that you can about these things, because it can help you figure out what's going on in an underlying way within the story here. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end this Gann Week video, and I'll talk to you next month.